So the next kind of interaction, population interaction that we see here is competition. See, we have come across the chart wherein we have studied the predation. Already we have studied in the previous video, where in the case of predation, one organism which actually predates on the prey will be benefited and the prey will be having a negative impact, that will be harmed, right? And again, the predators as well as prey, the interaction will have so many aspects, like different examples we have studied. The predations, they actually act as the conduits in an ecosystem, right? That means they help in the transfer of the energy from one level to another level. Not only that, they will help to control the population of the prey species, also that they will help in maintenance of ecological balance, and even they also help to maintain what species diversity in a given habitat. So we have studied this with example in the previous video, and in this video we will study another population interaction called competition. So competition, you know, it will be having a negative effect on both the species involved here. Both the populations which are involved in this will have a negative impact, right? A detrimental impact. Darwin believed that the interspecific competition is a potent force in organic evolution. Nodi, competition illa anta helidre. See, the theory of Darwin's theory of evolution mainly talks about struggle for existence. Note this point, struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. The organism which will struggle for its existence, the organism which is actually fit enough to survive in the given set of conditions, so only that will be considered as the fittest and only that can survive, right? That means it is clearly talking about what? Competition. Struggle ಮಾಡೋದು, it is nothing but what? Struggling and competing with the other organisms. So survival of the fittest ಅಂತ ಯಾವಾಗ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ? So when different species are competing with each other for a same set of resources, the one species which is fittest, which is the most efficient to gain all its requirement, that species is the one which will be considered as the fittest species. So that is why Darwin, what he believes, for organic evolution to happen, what is very important? Competition interaction is very important for evolution to happen, because that this is what actually bases the theory of Darwin, evolution theory of Darwin. So a common notion, so common idea about the competition among the species is that competition occurs when closely related species are involved in the kind of interaction. So yavaglu species which are very much closely related, they are involved in the interaction and they compete for the same set of resources or the same resources. Maybe food, maybe mate, or maybe what? The space, right? So this is the common understanding that we have. Closely related species competing for some what is that? Same set of resources. But this is not always true. This cannot be always true. There are cases where the species which are not at all closely related, and they may not be fighting or they may not be competing for the same set of resources. So let us study the competition in detail now. Firstly, the totally unrelated species could also compete with each other, right? And for same species, right? So this is one case we are considering. They are totally unrelated, but still they are competing for the same species. Example, flamingos. Flamingos are the birds you may be knowing. So they visit the shallow lakes, small lakes of South America, and they are going to compete with the species of the fishes which are living in the lake. Those fishes are actually what? Native species. Allige, native alle, originally they belong to that particular lake. But these flamingos are visiting birds. They are migratory birds. And there exists a competition between these flamingos and the native fishes, because both the fishes and the flamingos feed upon the zooplanktons. Zooplanktons anta helidre, the small insects, the small animals which are floating on the surface of the water, especially insects, right? So the flamingos also have to feed upon the zooplanktons, and the fishes also depend upon the same zooplanktons there. That is why there exists a competition. Though these two species are completely unrelated, they are not at all closely related, but still competing for the same resource. This is one example. Now, secondly, resources need not be limiting for a competition to occur. Now, illi nodi, in this statement we had seen, they compete for the same set of resources which are limiting. Now, that is what this cannot be always true anta heliddu idakoskara. One case we have already seen, they may not be closely related. The other case is that the resources may not be limiting always. It is not necessary for the resources to be limiting always. Sometimes even in the abundant availability of the nutrients or abundant availability of the resources also, the competition still tends to exist, right? So, it is called as interference competition. Andre, so the feeding efficiency of one species might be reduced due to the feeding efficiency of the other or the dominating species, right? Illi enagutte anta helidre, see, two animals feeding on the same plant. For example, you can consider a deer and a rabbit. So let us just, for example, we say the rabbit and the deer both are feeding on the carrot plant anta andkoli, and if the capacity to engulf, the speed of feeding is obviously more in the deer because it's a bigger animal than compared to the rabbit. Rabbit eats very slowly because it is a tiny small animal, right? So now what happens? So even though the resources are abundantly available, they are not limiting, but still because of the interference of the other species, so this rabbit species is experiencing a kind of competition with that species, right? Eradukku common source ide. Common source of what is a common resource is the same thing, but even though that resource is not limiting, even though it is abundantly available, because the deer eats everything fast, so the rabbit may have a situation where it will not get anything to feed upon. Right? So that is what is called as interference competition. So you can go through this statement. The feeding efficiency of one species might be reduced due to the interfering and inhibitory presence of the other species, even if resources, food and space are abundant. So this is one example that we have considered, right? So usually happens in a group of dogs. No, you cannot literally take it as an example for interspecific interaction. See, if you throw a packet of biscuits, if there are 4 or 5 dogs, this is a common scene that you have already observed. If you throw a packet of biscuits in front of them, the dog which is very much dominant, it dominates over the other dogs and it will eat away most of the biscuits, leaving very less number of biscuits for the other dogs. This, though it is an intraspecific, idu onde species agodidru kuda, but the same kind of interaction also can exist between two different species which are competing for the same set of resources, right? So this is that means two different conditions we are considering here. Therefore, the competition, how can we define the competition? This is the definition. It can be best defined as a process in which the fitness of the species, nodi fitness anta helidaga, how do we define the fitness? So the species, how can we consider a species to be fit? So this is based on the R value. R anta helidre, in the previous class we have considered, it is the intrinsic rate of increase of the population. The species which is very much efficient to increase the population, where the birth rate is more and death rate is less. So then R value will be more, isn't it? For that kind of species, that will be considered as the fittest, right? So competition is best defined as the process in which the fittest of the species is significantly lower in the presence of another species. Okay? So that means, because of competition, what happens? One species interacting with the other species, one may dominate and one may go recessive. That means one may be adversely affected, right? So this is called interference competition. So here, Gauss competitive exclusive principle. In some cases, it happens like this. So a particular species may be completely excluded from a particular habitat. See, what does it state? Let us try to read this and try to understand. It states that two closely related species competing for the same resources cannot coexist indefinitely, and the competitively inferior one will be eliminated eventually. The same thing. Again, we are coming or arriving at the Darwin's theory of evolution. The one which is fittest can survive, the one which is weakest has to be eliminated. Adanne helta irodilli. Gauss competitive exclusion principle says that what? Yaudo ondu habitat nalli, if there are two species living together, they cannot live together, they cannot continue to coexist in case if both of these populations of two species are actually dependent upon the same resource. One day resource mele for a long duration they cannot, because either of the two will dominate on the other. ಎರಡರಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದನ್ನು ಡಾಮಿನೇಟ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ, and that is when the one species which is getting dominated ಅಂದರೆ ವೀಕ್ ಇರುವಂಥದ್ದು it will get excluded from that habitat, it will get eliminated, right? Eliminated ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ it may migrate to some other habitat or it may completely become extinct also. Extinction ಆದರೂ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು ಅಥವಾ complete migration ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು. This is what is called as Gauss competitive exclusion principle. So this can be considered as an example here. Gauss principle may be true only when the resources are limited. Yes. So in this example, let us try to understand the Gauss principle of exclusion. So the Abingdon tortoise in the Galapagos Islands. Galapagos Islands are known for rich biodiversity. So for different reasons which you learn in the evolution chapter. So Abingdon tortoise annuvantaddu that was that when it became extinct within a decade after the goats were introduced into the island. Andre nodi, the Abingdon tortoise and goats, they are two completely unrelated species, but when goats were introduced into the Galapagos Island, the Abingdon tortoise got extinct apparently because both were browsing or grazing on the grass, or maybe they were depending upon the same source of food. That is why, so this is a kind of interference competition, right? So illenaitu, because of the introduction or because of the dominance of the goats, the species Abingdon tortoise got completely excluded. It became extinct. So this is what is explained by Gauss exclusive principle, right? So, and the other example, Canals elegant field experiments. Canal is the name of the scientist. So he conducted elegant field experiments, showed that on the rocky sea coast of the Scotland nalli sea coast, rocky sea coast galalli, the larger and competitively superior barnacle. So see here, you can, this is the Balanus, this is the smaller one, Balanus species anta kariteve. So this is the larger one. Illi eradunu kaanabodu. The smaller ones which you are seeing here, these are actually what? These are actually the smaller ones, they are the Balanus. The larger ones, they are called as Cathalamallus, right? So here, read out this. Superior barnacle Balanus dominates the intertidal area and excludes the smaller barnacle called Cathalamallus from that zone. I'm sorry, I must have told you wrongly. So Balanus is the larger species, whereas Cathalamallus is the smaller species. So what happens in the rocky islands of the Scotland or a rocky sea coast of the Scotland, what happens was, because of the growth of the population of the Balanus, which actually competes with the resources with what? Cathalamallus. This is the, actually both are what? They are barnacles only, right? But belonging to the different species, whereas this will be suppressed. The smaller one, Cathalamallus, will be suppressed. The Balanus dominates, and that is how the colonization of the Balanus increases more rapidly than compared to the Cathalamallus, where eventually the population of Cathalamallus will be completely excluded. It may become extinct, right? So this is one example of these Gauss principles. Now, competitive release is another concept that we come across. So a species, let us just read this. A species whose distribution is restricted to a small geographical area because of the presence of competitively superior species is found to expand its distribution range dramatically when the competing species is experimentally removed. Andre, so if in any area, if there are two species which are in the competition, which are involved in the competition, so obviously they are confronting the competition from both ends with each other. Erduku ondukondu competition ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, and if by experiment, if one of the two species A ಮತ್ತು species B ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದನ್ನು ರಿಮೂವ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ the remaining species ರಿಮೂವ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದನ್ನು ಹೋಯ್ತು, ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಷನ್ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ, so this one will actually expand its what territory or habitat, because it will enjoy more resources without any interruption, without any interference, without any competition, right? So that is what the competitive release ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ, right? So when competition is removed, what happens? A rapid growth of the population of one species. So resource partitioning, see, in the Gauss exclusive principle, we came across that when the resources are limiting, when two species are actually depending upon the same, so one of the two species will get removed, will get excluded anta ನಾವು ಕಲ್ತ್ವಿ ಅಲ್ವಾ? But this cannot be true when the resources are unlimited. Only when the resources are limited, the Gauss principle can be true. But here, when even though a set of species, maybe two different species or many different species are actually dependent upon one source of food and one source of habitat, but still they can coexist. How is it possible? This is what is called as resource partitioning. Andre iruva resource anna they are going to partition and they will avoid the competition. How is it possible? See, they might avoid competition by choosing different times of feeding. Like for example, some may become nocturnals, may be active during the night time. Some may become diurnals, active during the daytime. Andre daytime nalli ಯಾವುದು ಆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನೈಟ್ ಟೈಮ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುವಂತಹದ್ದು ಡಿಸ್ಟರ್ಬ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ನೈಟ್ ಟೈಮ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಇರುವಂತದಕ್ಕೆ ಡೇ ಟೈಮ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆರ್ಗಾನಿಸಮ್ ಡಿಸ್ಟರ್ಬ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. So they will change their feeding time, they will change their foraging habits, right? So this is one thing, and by doing so they promote coexistence. They can live together successfully, completely avoiding what? The competition. So as observed by MacArthur, he observes that a particular species of the birds which are called as warblers, 5 different species of warbler birds living, 5 different species which are closely associated, they are living on the same tree, but still, despite there is a single source of nutrition or single source of resources, despite that they are able to live coexist, they are able to have a coexistence by avoiding competition because of the differences in their behavior and their foraging activities or nutritional activities. So this is what is called as resource partitioning anta kariteve, right? So this is about what? This competition. So need to remember the definition, need to remember the different examples, especially when we talk about the two. See, this is the common notion, common understanding, and there are 2 other deviations for that common understanding. That is, it need not be always what related species ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತಿಲ್ಲ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ, ಆರ್ ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತಿಲ್ಲ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ. ಅಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಟಾಕ್ಡ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ವಾಟ್? ಸೊ ಫಿಟ್ನೆಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಸ್ಪೀಶೀಸ್. ಸೊ ದ ಒನ್, ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ಆಕ್ಚುಲಿ ದ ಡೆಫಿನೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ದ, based on the fitness of the species, we are going to define what is actually competition, right? And this can be an important question for 1 mark or 2 mark. Gauss competition exclusion principle with example you need to remember. So these are the examples, right? And so already we have seen this competitive release ಬಗ್ಗೆ 1 mark question ಕೇಳಬಹುದು, and resource partitioning ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕೂಡ 1 mark, and along with the example they may ask you, right? So this is about the competition. In the next video we will study another what kind of interaction of the populations called parasitism. So that we will see in the next video.